So you think you got a full 40% margin to work with? Think again. Hey everybody, welcome to the DCSI Parts Guys. We're brought to you by Dealership CSI. We're powered by ESPM. I'm Rick, and there's Jer. How you doing tonight, Jer?
I'm doing real good, Rick. On here in Texas right now, visiting some clients and ready to bring forward some good ideas about markup and gross profit that we're going to share with our audience tonight.
Our whole goal here with the DCSI Parts Guys is to do just that, is to bring a variety of different tips and tricks and knowledge about professional inventory management in the automotive business, and share some of the stuff that we picked up along the way with guys, and hopefully it turns into them being able to manage their departments a little better, a little more profitable, and a little more fun too. So Jerry, you get out a lot, and you talk to dealers a lot about different things. Tonight, we're going to talk about the myth of the 40% margin, and that's gross profit margin, by the way. When you're out talking to dealers, what kind of response do you get when you get into the margin conversation? Is there an understanding out there that everybody really has a good grasp on it?
No, Rick, I think there's a lot of confusion out there. The ones that seem to have the best grasp on what their gross profit margins are obviously the dealer principals and the general managers. They're looking at the financial statement, and that's really the bottom line is what's showing up on the financial statement, what kind of profit margins am I able to achieve? And it's broken down obviously by different categories, and that's where the scrutiny comes in is what am I making on customer pay, RO, gross profit margin, what am I making on my warranty, what's my margin? And a lot of the parts managers out there really don't understand how you go about affecting that margin and how it's calculated. So I think we're going to give them some good tools here to explain how to calculate that margin, and if I'm a little low on my margin, what do I have to do? What are some things I can do to improve that margin? But the biggest thing like we're going to do in this session, I believe, is just clear up the difference between actual markup percentages and gross profit percentages, because they're completely different.
So Jerry, you're telling me if I want to get a 40% margin, I can just take my cost, add 40% to it, and bang, I've got 40% margin.
Well, Rick, unfortunately, that's what a lot of people think, but that's just not going to get you there. If you take a part and you mark it up 40%, you're probably going to end up right around 28% gross profit margin, and that's really what it's going to be. And the 40% margin, there's a lot of misunderstanding, because for the longest time in the business, manufacturers paid on warranty, and they paid a cost plus 40%. So a lot of people confuse that with what the margin is.
So if we take a look at our Dealership CSI markup gross profit chart, we're going to see that there is a little bit of difference in the markup and the margin. So if we take a look at a 40%, you're right, Jer. If I put a 40% markup on my margin, and on our chart here, by the way, we've got cost laid out, we've got markup and selling price, and then gross profit percentage. And as you can see here, if I've got a $100 cost on a part, we used $100 just to keep everything simple. If I put 40% markup, I'm selling it at $140, and I'm making 28.6% gross profit. So not hardly the 40% that I was hoping for. Where do you think I got to go to get 40% margin, Jared?
Well, based on the experience I've seen, I think you need to look for about a 67% markup in order to get that 40% margin range.
Well, let's look at the chart and see what that looks like. If if I'm looking at a 67% margin, I'm now selling my part at $167, $100 cost, 67% markup, 40.1% margin. So I had a conversation with the guy the other day, parts manager. We're talking about internal pricing and how the pricing set up in that dealership, and he's pretty happy. He says, well, look, I've got 30% margin on my wholesale business. And my question was, well, how do you know? And he says, well, it's all cost plus 30. And I said, well, wait a minute. Cost plus 30 doesn't give you 30% margin. And he said, well, yeah, it does. And I said, no, I don't think so. Let's take a look at the chart and see what we come up with here. So if we go over to the 30% margin, do the math, got $100 cost, got 30% markup, $130. I'm only at 23% for my supposed 30% margin from the used car department. So in order to make that really fly, I've got to be somewhere around 43% markup. $143 would be my selling price on a $100 cost, and my gross profit comes up to 30.1%. So, Jared, that's a common misunderstanding that we find. We see it out there when they're trying to price for all kinds of different merchandise, when we're trying to do some specials, etc. So we're going to take a look at a couple of these formulas that we put together, and let's see what the formulas look like when we start to make them happen. First off, we're going to look at the selling price. You want to walk through that one, Jer?
Sure can, Rick. On the chart that we have here, obviously we have a cost of $100. We have a markup of 67%, which in this case, obviously 67% of $100 would be $67. That's what gets us to our selling price of $167. So when we talked before, we talked about a 67% markup in the margin, and that's really what it takes in order to get to that 40% gross profit margin that a lot of dealers are looking for and expecting to receive on most of their part sales. So again, you need to figure out what the markup is to get to the certain margin percentage you're looking for. In this case, we're looking for that 40% margin. We want to go with a 67% markup.
So how do we figure the gross profit on that?
Well, to figure the gross profit on that, you have to take your gross profit and divide that back into the selling price. So again, that same part that we were talking about, we're selling it for $167. We take our costs, subtract that out, and we have $67 worth of gross profit. You take your gross profit and you divide it back into the selling price. So in other words, my gross profit of 67, you divide it back into the selling price of 167, and we come to our 40% gross profit margin. It helps to have a calculator handy when you're doing some of these calculations. Obviously, this chart is probably the most handy tool when you're trying to figure out, what do I have to mark something up to achieve a certain margin?
So, Jer, if a guy has this chart available and wants to figure out some pricing, it's real easy to just look down the chart, figure out what you want to do, and then do your calculations. So we have this chart available, and we'll be glad to send it out to anybody that would like a copy of it. How can we do a quick calculation here and figure out what our selling price is going to be without jumping through some hoops?
Well, to do that, obviously you could use the chart, but again, it's a simple formula that we have here is to take the selling price minus the cost, gives you your gross profit, divide that gross profit into your selling price, and that's what calculates your margin. So we've got a quick formula. If you go over to that, we can look at the quick formula, and the quick formula says that cost times your markup plus 100% is going to give you your selling price. So again, on a cost of $100, we multiply that out times 1.67 or 167% to come up with that selling price of 167.
So that makes it pretty easy, Jer. If you want to do some quick calculations, you're looking at your, you got a line of specials you want to put together for the service drive. Maybe you're doing a brake special or some windshield wiper specials, and you want to hold a 30% margin. You can just do the math real easy, figure out your new selling price, and know that you're able to hold the margin. So, Jared, go ahead.
No, I agree with you 100%, Rick, and that's what it's really all about. This chart is a handy tool, but those two formulas, you write those two formulas down that we showed you, and the way to come up with those calculations, and you're halfway there.
Well, like I said, if anybody wants a copy of the chart, drop us an email and take a look at some of your margins and do some of the math and see if you're working this out properly. You could be leaving some money on the table, and if nothing else, you now have a little better understanding of how this works. So, Jerry, I want to thank you for joining us from Texas.
Rick, it was my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to some more of these. Like I said, it's some good information, and hopefully you'll be able to use it in your dealership to make your parts department maybe a little bit more profitable.
Well, Jerry, in our next installment of the DCSI Parts Guys and the myth of the 40% margin part 2, we're going to take a look at the manufacturers and their pricing and how all of that pricing comes back to a dealer. And believe me, not all manufacturers are created equal. So it'll be a pretty interesting layout of where we stand. And from there, part 3, we're going to talk about how we can protect ourselves and insulate ourselves against those low margins and make sure we know what we're getting into. So till then, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Remember, if you like what we're doing here, subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, share it around, and if you have any questions, drop a comment or send us an email. We'll be glad to get it back to you. And Jarrett, again, thank you. Appreciate you joining us.
All right, look forward to the next time.